Staying in Southern Africa 3 years after initially defaulting on the debts, the Zambian government has agreed in principle to restructure the debt with a steering group comprising holders of $3 billion in Eurobonds. The Finance and National Planning Minister says an agreement has been reached on the major commercial parameters of its proposed overhaul of its bonds for 2022, 2024 and 2027. As part of the agreement, over $700 million in claims will be permanently waived, and during the country's International Monetary Fund program time, decreased debt service payments will provide approximately $2.5 billion in cash flow assistance. The Hakainde Hichilema government has suffered a long delay in restructuring $13 billion in external debt, including $3 billion of foreign currency bonds since a 2020 default under his predecessor, Edgar Lungu. Now, joining me tonight to discuss this development further is Trevor Hambayi, Senior Managing Partner at Development Finance Associates. A warm welcome to you, Trevor, and thanks for joining us on SC Continental Prime.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you and the viewers.
Good evening, Trevor. Now, Trevor, Zambia was the first African country to default in the COVID-19 era in late 2020, but its restructuring process has been beset by delays. 2 years down the line, we finally have something to move forward with. Why were there so many delays in getting this process started and moving?
Firstly, it is the basis on which we were actually seeking the debt restructuring. You must appreciate that the debt restructuring was a process that was started after the country defaulted. And after the default, obviously, there are lots of factors that come into play regarding the different type of debt that the country was owing. Of the external debt, there were 4 different components to that external debt. We had bilateral lenders and multilateral lenders, which we're calling now the official creditors. We also had commercial debt, which was from the capital market. This was the bond. And then there was also commercial debt that was from private lenders that are supported by bilateral lenders, which is private loans that we got from China. But in total, we had more than 30 different creditors that we borrowed the resources from. And in having to be able to get a debt restructuring process where everybody was agreeing on the parameters was very difficult, was the first issue. The second issue was the issue of the fact that when we did start the restructuring, we were speaking with the IMF to try and help us do this. The biggest creditor for the country, who was holding more than 50% of the debt, was China, and they were not on the negotiating table. And this took a lot of time to get them on the negotiating table before they agreed to be able to join the discussions as a co-chair of the negotiating team, because they said they had a bigger interest in terms of what they were going to lose. And I think those were the cardinal issues. But then you also find the fact that there's geopolitical issues that were coming into play between the West and the East, in that the West was driving this debt restructuring in terms of the terms and conditions, but the one who was holding the debt in major component was China. This presented a bit of a problem, and I think this has come into play. The last one, obviously, is that when we did start the debt restructuring, there was a position where it was announced that the bondholders were also not happy because they had not been fully consulted in terms of how we were going to restructure this debt. And I think those are the complications that we're there in trying to restructure this. Also, from an international perspective, is that they were trying to try and find a balance, because how Zambia restructures its debt is going to play out for all the other countries that are looking forward to be able to restructure their debt. So there are also considerations that it's not just about Zambia that we're dealing with. They're also dealing about the future replications that are going to come with the other countries that are seeking debt.
Now, Trevor, the deal proposes to restructure existing bonds by issuing 2 new amortizing bonds maturing in 2035 and 2053. These bonds involve repayments going towards both interest and principal. Take us through how this would work and how are they different from traditional bonds in debt structuring?
So essentially, the bonds themselves are still the same. They just been consolidated because we had three bonds that we had taken at a different time to get to the 3 billion. One was 750, one was 1.25 billion, and one was 1 billion. So they have consolidated them. But in essence, they still remain the same way in terms of coupon payments. There are issues that have been done because since we defaulted in 2020, we had also accrued a lot of interest arrears that had not been paid. Most of this has been written off. Up to around $700 million has been written off from the actual debt. We'll also have a moratorium before we start to repay, but the repayment has been extended until 2035. The interest rate has also been locked. Before we had a floating interest rate. Now I think it's been locked at around 5.5 for the first Eurobond, and then I think it's 8% for the second one. And then we'll have an option to be able to extend this from 2035 to 2053 if the country has not achieved specific macroeconomic indicators that are speaking to be able to meet the debt repayment. So there's been a haircut in terms of reduction and as well as the reduction in interest rate. But the coupon, the bond itself remains as a bond for which we have to pay coupons.
Now, Trevor, the second bond's coupon payments is expected to increase if Zambia's economy performs better. No, you're not soothsayer, but do you think there will be significant improvement in Zambia's economy during the time under review from the information you have at hand and from the current performance of the Zambian economy?
So essentially, the economy has not yet started to be able to recover in terms of growth. For 2023, we are expecting that there has been a contraction again, where we're only going to have 2.7% in GDP growth. They're estimating a 4.8% GDP growth. But essentially, I think the country should be working towards having to be able to reach an accelerated GDP growth to allow them to be able to pay back the loan before the 2035. Because once we get to 2035, it will become more expensive because the interest rate then will change at that point from the locked one that we do have at 8%.
Now, thank you so much for your contribution, Trevor. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for your insights on the subject.
The pleasure was mine. You have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you.